I have led warden strikes onto 3 burning stations and 1 drifting hulk full of the dead, and I tell you truthfully that nothing prepared me for Korvath Hold on the night the alarms went silent. The report that reached my desk said uprising, 1,200 exiled human laborers, 1 processing colony, comms down, motion sensors screaming in the intake gallery. My superiors used the word revolt so many times in the briefing that I walked off the shuttle, already shaping the account I would write afterward. Casualties, containment, the tiresome paperwork of putting down an insurrection. I had my warden's fan out in strike order, rifles low, visors sealed. I expected barricades. I expected the stink of makeshift weapons and burning conduit. What I found, when we cut through the outer hatch, was worse, in a way none of us had drilled for. Bodies on the floor of the gallery, yes, but not fighting bodies. Laborers slumped over control panels, folded against the walls, some of them still twitching, none of them armed. My lead warden knelt by the nearest one and said, very quietly, that his lips had gone the color of old iron. Not a revolt, a gas. I want to be honest about what that first minute felt like, because I have thought about it often since. There is a particular shame in raising a rifle at people who cannot lift their own heads to look at you. My wardens stood in that gallery with their weapons still trained on doorways and on shadows and on nothing at all, because none of us yet understood there was no enemy to aim at, only a machine somewhere above us, failing, and 1,200 people breathing whatever it gave them. The colony's atmospheric plant recycles every breath 1,200 exiles take, scrubbing what they exhale and returning it clean. Something in that plant had failed, and failed badly, and the toxin building in the recirculated air did not care whether the lungs breathing it belonged to a criminal or a magistrate. My own engineers, Threnai trained, Dominion certified, 3 of them with decorations I had pinned on myself, clustered around the readouts and argued in the clipped, overlapping way people argue when they are frightened and do not want anyone to notice. The plant's diagnostic board threw 100 conflicting faults. None of them matched what the gauges were actually doing. The toxin curve kept climbing. I remember checking the chronometer and understanding, with the flat certainty of a man doing the arithmetic of other people's deaths, that we did not have enough time for anyone credentialed to find the fault the correct way. That was when the laborer came forward. She was an older woman, human, gray at the temples, wearing the same gray coveralls as every other exile on that colony, with the exile's collar mark still burned into the fabric at her throat. She did not ask permission. She simply walked to the edge of the gallery railing, tilted her head the way you do when you are listening for something under a noise, and said, "Baffles jammed. 4th stage. I can hear it flexing." One of my engineers, a man named Kassarin who has never in his life been wrong quietly, told her to step back behind the containment line. She did not step back. She said, "You've got maybe 6 minutes before the intake curve crosses into a range these people don't wake up from. I used to run this exact plant. Let me look at the 4th stage access, or argue with me about it after." I do not know, even now, why I gave the order I gave. Perhaps it was the chronometer. Perhaps it was the particular stillness in the way she said it. No plea in it, no defiance either. Just a woman stating a fact she had checked twice before opening her mouth. I told Kassarin to let her through. Her name, I would learn afterward, was Rosalind Keir. The colony records called her a saboteur, exiled 11 years prior for an accident at a refinery 2 systems distant, a plant she was never permitted to defend herself over in any hearing I could later find record of. She went down the access ladder into the 4th stage gallery with a handlight clipped to her collar and an old bent pry bar she had pulled, without asking, from a maintenance locker that had clearly been hers once. I followed 2 rungs behind with my own light raised, more to prove to myself I was not simply standing by while a condemned woman worked alone in the dark than for any use I was to her. The baffle, when we reached it, looked to my eye like nothing at all, a wide vein of scored metal set crosswise in a duct wider than both of us standing. She put her palm flat against the housing before she touched a single tool to it. Then she said, mostly to herself, "There you are," and set the pry bar into a seam I could not have found if you had given me a week. She did not force it. That surprised me most. She worked it slow, testing, backing off, testing again, the way you coax a stuck door rather than break it, until the vein gave with a groan I felt through the deck plating more than heard. She reseated it by hand, checked the seat with her palm a second time, and only then looked up at the readout panel bolted above the ladder. For a long moment nothing happened at all, and I confess I thought she had failed, and I began composing, out of old habit, the report I would have to write about it. Then the airflow gauge above the ladder gave a small, ordinary tick, the kind of sound a machine makes when it has simply been allowed to do the job it was built for. The toxin curve, which had been climbing since before I arrived on that colony, bent over and began, gently, to fall. Fourth stage vein warps under thermal load if nobody reshims it every few years, she said, wiping her hand on her coveralls. Nobody has. Why would they? Nobody who runs the numbers up top has ever had to breathe what comes out the other end of it. I had no answer for her. I still do not, entirely. We got the laborers into clean air within the hour. All of them lived. My engineers filed a technical report crediting emergency intervention by colony personnel, which is the kind of sentence written by men trying not to say a name. I said the name. It would have been simpler, I think, for everyone above me if I had let the technical report stand as written, the way such reports usually stand, crediting no one in particular, so that no one in particular has to be thanked, or paid, or reconsidered. I have signed my name to reports like that before, in easier years, and slept without difficulty afterward. I did not think I could do that again. Not after watching a condemned woman work a stuck vein loose in the dark, while 3 certified engineers argued with each other, under bright lights and clean air, 6 decks above where the actual danger was. I pulled her file that same night, the accident that had put the exile collar on her throat 11 years before we ever met, and I read it the way I read every file, looking, at first, only for the parts that would let me close the matter quickly. What I found instead was a signature on the original incident report that did not match the operator logs from that shift, a supervisor's name scrubbed from 3 subsequent revisions, and a woman who had been on medical leave the day the fault she was blamed for actually occurred. It had taken someone perhaps 4 hours of deliberate, careful work to bury that truth well enough that it had stayed buried for 11 years. It took me one evening to dig it back up, because nobody before me had thought a laborer's record worth the effort. I stood in the gallery the next morning and I voided her sentence in front of the wardens, the engineers, and whatever laborers were well enough to stand and watch. I told her honestly that the Dominion owed her 11 years and an apology neither of us could make whole, and that her engineer's rank and her name were hers again, as of that hour, and that a transport back to any world she named was hers for the asking. She looked at the crowd behind me, men and women in gray coveralls, some of them still pale from the gas, all of them watching her the way people watch someone they have quietly known was worth more than her collar said, and she told me she would take the rank and the name, gladly, but that she would be staying on at Corvath Hold, at least for now, because a plant that has gone 11 years without a proper shim job does not fix itself with one good afternoon, and because these were, as she put it, her people now, whether the Dominion had meant to give them to her or not. I have commanded warden strikes on 3 burning stations and 1 drifted hulk full of the dead. None of those nights taught me what that gallery taught me, that the alarm I answer is not always the one worth trusting, and that the most dangerous thing in any colony I have ever walked into was never the people we came prepared to fight. It was our own certainty that we already knew who the enemy was. Rosalind Keir still runs that plant. I visit twice a year now, mostly to check the shim schedule myself, though I suspect she knows that isn't really why I come.